Michael, thank you so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really, really excited to get you on.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to discuss futsal and football and the links, and hopefully it can bring some good listening.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a big one. I think there's a big demand for finding out a little bit more about futsal. You just mentioned there before we start recording about looking under the bonnet. I think that's a great term. It's something that I think we don't really understand fully, but I'm ashamed to say that this is my first futsal podcast. I've tried to touch on a number of areas, so I'm excited to get educated today. So the first question I have for you, I suppose, is just an intro one. Is the game has exploded over the world. I feel we were just talking before we started recording about the growth in the US. You started in it way before it became fashionable, I suppose. What was your pathway into the game? How did you get introduced to it?
Yeah, sure. So back many years, I want to say 2003, maybe a bit earlier. I was playing, well, like most people in England, I was playing in an academy, got released, started to do my coaching badges. I went off to university and played conference football. So I played conference football, non-league football, so a decent level, right? And at the point I was at university, I represented Great Britain University's football team, so World University Games, and I was part of that structure. And at the point, the head coach at the time, Graham Dell, was the very first national coach for futsal in England, but he was also the Great Britain University's football coach. And I was doing well in the football, and I think he thought, well, actually, he's got some attributes that might do well in futsal. So we're starting a futsal team, or close to it. A couple of years after they started it, he asked me if I wanted to get involved, and I was like, wow, what is it? What were we talking about here? Because in English culture at that point, it was like, didn't even heard of it. Jumped on a plane to Thailand and walked out in front of about 7,000 people watching a game of futsal, i.e. us versus Thailand. And I was just like, whoa, okay, this is different. And I thought I could play a little bit, technically good, fit. And we lost. I can't remember what the score was. I think it was something like 8-1, and we couldn't get anywhere near the ball. And I thought I could play a little bit, right? Through going through, decent level at non-league, getting paid, training 3 times a week. And I couldn't get anywhere near these group of players and these Thai groups of players in the environment. And then you went out on the bus to the hotel and you just saw everybody playing it. And I was like, God, there's got to be something in this, right? And just stuck with it, really. But try to study, right? Just try to study the whole way. Then stayed in it. So playing football and futsal. Then moved probably later into more futsal specific, whilst coaching, whilst teaching, whilst doing all my badges. And just making sure that from that point, I was basically doing both. And then most recently, obviously, with the national team job, the last X amount of years, specialising a little bit more in futsal and taking it a bit further. So, yeah, that was my introduction, really, which was a baptism of fire, but quite a good one.
Brilliant. I suppose like the first real question would be like in terms of the coaching of it, because I want to get stuck into that because I think there's just so much to it. I'll tell the coaches listening that a lot of stuff that where I've drawn questions from has been the boot room article where you've done the video. Yeah. And here I absolutely loved it. Like just the way it was presented, fantastic. The different sections it goes down. So I'll put the link on that for coaches.
Oh, yeah.
But the first thing that jumped out at me was this decision-making component. And because there are, and this is just my perception of it, lesser players, more decisions, more freedom and fluidity in the game equals more decisions. Where do you start now? Where's the framework start in this?
Yeah, good question. I suppose it's a really good question. I suppose like any invasion game, I think it can be really complex, but the coach's job is to make it simpler for the player, but also giving, this term's overused sometimes, the ownership to the player to make the decisions. But, I believe that any sport, especially in, like say, invasion games where you go against someone, you need to go through 3 processes. And, I've studied this with a friend of mine, James Ellis, over years, where I did the World University Games. We talked about, you have to see it. So perception, then you have to make a decision, like what we're talking about, the decision, and then you have to act it, right? The technical bit. And I always say, perception, decision, action. We have to go through those processes as a player. However, where do you coach? Do you coach perception? Do you coach decision, or do you coach action? And a lot of the time, to do is to do the action, but actually, is that what's breaking down, or is it the decision, or is it actually the perception? And in that cycle, because it is a cycle, where do you support the player, and how do you build and support that player? So, futsal is really quick, right? So you tend to build a framework for decision making, and then the freedom is with the player. And you spend a lot of time talking about, perceptual, what do you see and what decision you're making, and then the technical action. But everybody's drawn to futsal as a technical game. Everybody sees it as a technical game. I actually think if you get under the bonnet, like we use that term of futsal, what futsal really teaches you is about perception, decision off the ball with movement. And I think the beauty of the game is how you find space and how you utilize that space, how you mold that space to become a better player, to have more time, to make better decisions. And the action really is the output of those two processes for me. So, my own sort of grown philosophy would be around those three elements, and how do you coach through those three elements, and how do you support the learner, the player, through those three elements. And that can be quite didactic at times, and that can be telling them about what's the best decision, or that can be quite, freer to say, well, you can make any decision you like. But in the same sense, like, I think you always have to draw it back to the demands of the game. So actually, when we're asking them to be free decision making, does it have the framework of the game? Does it look like the game? Are we asking you to make decisions that you can make in the game? And then how do you I call it scaffolding, and build that support around the players to understand that. And I think, you can't tell a futsal player what to do on a court because it's so fast. And by the time I've even opened my mouth, the decision's gone, the situation's gone. So you tend to be really sort of you coaching those things, and it gives them more ownership to the players to make the freedom of the decisions. But you've got to have a framework, you've got to have a structure, you've got to have a plan around that. Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So it's what you're saying there. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we probably misinterpret it at the level of execution, because it's the technique. But probably then I would say that's what jumps out to the regular coach first of all, how they manipulate the football. So would that be? Is that something that does that have to be almost to scaffold? Is there a technical skill set that's completely different or unique to the 11v11 footballer?
Yeah, good question. It's like when you speak to I suppose go back to the point about, like, naturally the technique comes out because of the speed, right? So the game's fast, but as an experienced futsal coaches can tell a fast game of futsal, a slow game of futsal. I'll give you an example. A futsal game on a wooden court is faster than a game on a rubber court, and you can tell the difference. And I'll explain that by saying, like, when you play on a wet dew surface in grass and the ball's zipping around, that's like a wooden court. When you play on a rubber court, it's like it's a dry surface, the ball rolls more. And the top level players and the top coaches can even tell the differences in the speed of that. So, but the technical bit comes from the demands of the game and the constraints of the game. So less space, less time demands more technical elements. So, for me, and I've said this in lots of times, the game gives back so much feedback from the constraints. So the fact that you don't play to a wall makes that you have to be, you have to be good with the ball. You can't just boom it and kick it off. You lose possession, you'll get punished. The surface and the ball together make the game fast. So you can put a futsal ball on grass, but ultimately that'll be slower than putting a football on grass. So if you're after fast returns, then that wouldn't necessarily work. The goals are obviously 3 by 2 meters. So that basically means for the kids, the players, you have to move the ball closer to the goal or have a harder shot. So and then you've got the laws. So if it comes out to you, you can't go back unless it goes over the halfway line. So all these sort of cocktail of constraints, I think, gives the player some demands that are not always placed on them as feedback. So I think the game does a lot, right? I'm not going to do myself a disservice here. I think the game for football development does quite a lot. And so it develops certain techniques. So, for example, the natural one that sits out to all players, and I've heard this with coaches, you must use your soul. Well, no, you mustn't, but they use the soul because we call it oriented control, which means you control it and set it up for your next move in one pass. So actually it's faster over a process to use your soul than to have a touch, get your head up, take a touch out your feet. So actually, but there's no need to use your soul if you can do it with your instep quick. There's no rule against that. It's just a natural technique that's come out. But what I find is that players that have grown up with football and futsal can jump into futsal, even though the footballers, and just fit straight back in. It seems like their toolbox is bigger. It seems like their toolbox is better. If you've not grown up with futsal, i.e. me, suddenly go into a futsal environment and I have to use my instep in a really tight situation when actually I should use my soul, I find it a little bit more tricky to convert. But if you put that again in a football context, you're seeing a lot more of soul being used at certain areas, toe pokes, the ability to lock defenders 1v1, those types of situations. And I think this is because, a lot of the players that we admire are doing both to start, really.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that technical base, about the 11v11 footballer versus the futsal footballer. You're saying there that one probably goes into the other ecosystem a lot easier. Is that because that the futsal game is so fluid that you can't actually be one dimensional, that you've got to be probably a jack of all trades, so to speak, technically?
Yeah, I think it depends on the age, and it depends on the pathway, and it depends on the why. But if a kid grows up with futsal, I wouldn't call him a specialist, right? I'd just call him a kid playing futsal that's growing through it. And then at some point, what I think is that, at some point, different nations will choose between a football player and a futsal player. And for me, that's 14, 16, depending on them as individuals as well, right? So we've got to remember, we're putting the individual in this system. We're not just talking about you've got to do this or that and get the technique. The individual's part of that process. At the top level, there is, I wouldn't say there's 100% different tactics and techniques, but there's definitely things that are different. And it's positive. There's positive transfer between two games, and there's negative transfer between two games. And I think understanding that there's positive and understanding there's negative to the both actually makes you a more all-rounded coach, whether you're in football or futsal. So yeah, there would be things that I would ask of a football player at a top level that I wouldn't ask of a futsal player, and vice versa. And there'd be certain places where the game doesn't give you that technical return. So, for example, a 40 meter diagonal switch from right back to left wing is not that distance. So you're not going to get that from playing the game. But conversely, you could argue you're not going to get it's like playing 37v37 on a football pitch. So the time and space you get in futsal is less. So actually, does the game create different types of players for football if that's what you want it to be? I would say yes. So come back to your question, the rotation bit at the top level, there's still positions, right? At the top level, there's still specialists. At the top level, there's still roles that require you. What I think is it's more 80-20. So you spend 80%, I call it the 80-20. You spend 80% of being a specialist, but 20% of the time you've got to do the other stuff. Whereas maybe in football, you can be a number 9 and you never really have to do any other stuff. And I think that's where the game of futsal is brilliant for feedback and brutal, because if you don't do certain things in a game of futsal, because there's only small numbers, you might let your team down, right?
Yeah, we'll get to that there, but we've kind of gone through the technical approach and how that's probably the first thing a traditional coach looks at, 11v11 coach looks at. But then you've got something that, again, when I started watching a bit more of it, the speed of the game and the demands of the game. I never hear sports science and futsal linked, and again, probably ignorant to me because it's indoor sport. But is there a heavy emphasis on science? Does that physical component need to be there?
Wow, yeah. So I think like any sport, there's a physical element to it, and if there's a physical element to it, there's science behind it. And if there's science behind it, there's recruitment strategies behind it, and if there's recruitment strategies behind, there's development behind it, right? So. I think physically at the top level, the games are slightly different. So that doesn't mean you can't do either or, but I think physically the demands are slightly different. So to put that into sciencey, like a futsal player would probably spend 95% of his heart rate max for about 4 minutes playing absolute, going at it at high temp, which creates the intensity in the game, right? And then comes off and recovers and goes again. So basically, they're like, if you were to get a football player that's never played futsal but's got a really good stamina engine to come indoors, within 3 minutes they'll be blown up, and they'd have to sit down, and it would probably take them 15, 20 minutes to recover from their heart rate max. However, a futsal player is really good at recovering. So someone that's grown up in futsal could probably get, let's take it really sciencey, you know, on a bleep test, would probably get a low score, but they'd be recovered within 30 seconds. Whereas a footballer would get a high score, but once they've gone into the heart rate max, and we're generalizing here a little bit, their recovery would take a lot longer. So the energy systems in the professional end of both games are slightly different. But, you know, with the kids, with the developing systems, the high intensity play, again, the game of being really fast and really quick, you need to have a good anaerobic system that you can build through. So the other stuff around it is the speed in which you need to change direction. You know, like some of the what I call breaking strength of futsal players is so good because they're used to, you know, dropping 2 feet rather than 1 foot, changing direction, the speed of ability with the ball, not just without the ball. So what's their speed look? So if you go to the physical, you know, the things a futsal specialist probably don't have is the top end 60-meter sprints, because they don't need them, right? So they've got to be good over 10 meters. The first 10, probably 10 meters, they're rapid. But after that, their energy system, not their energy, but their speed isn't there. So yeah, it creates different physical demands, but creating different physical demands actually can help areas of physical that footballers need. So, you know, I look at most of the modern game of football at the minute, which is high pressing. And, you know, it seems like the modern football's going to the press. Well, actually, that's more like futsal to me than it was sort of 10 years ago, where people were playing more mid blocks.
Yeah, into the tactics now, the one of the complexities I think for me is that in-game coaching. Like this blows me away. 80 average substitutions, which I can't imagine a game that is so fluid and so there's so many interchanging with positions. This balance between control and freedom and structure, and then giving the players the license to do what. How much? Let's start on the 80 substitutions. How much of that is pre-planned, and how much of it is just they go off when they feel like it? I mean, at what stage are you? How are you planning for that in a match?
Yeah, no, great question. You learn to, right? If you do it more, you learn to. So, let me think. It's like, I'll be honest. When I come off a game of futsal at international level and I've managed the game, I'm tired. There's no doubt I'm really tired because of all the computing decisions. But you have a good staff team with you, help with those decisions. So, football, so much you can be tired, but you're not tired in the same way mentally tired. You know, and I've spoke to basketball coaches around this. It's similar to them. They're tired because they're making changes, and every change is a computer decision in your head. So I'll give you an example. Yes, it's definitely, it can be planned. It doesn't always have to be planned. Sometimes in the game, the players are making those decisions. Sometimes you're making those decisions, but everything's structured around those decision-making processes. So, for example, what would you make a decision on a substitute on? Well, you'd make a decision on like-for-like player. Is it like-for-like? Forward player for forward player. Are they the same forward player? A pivot? Are they a roaming pivot? Are they a false pivot that we call them? Is it a fix or a Batman? You do like for like. Now, sometimes the players will just make that decision because physically they'll go, boom, and the person that represents them the same on the bench will jump and go, yeah, I'll do that. Other times it'd be like, no, I don't want you on tactically. I want someone else on tactically. And that could be you want a faster 1v1 player on. You want a better possession builder. You want someone that can play in between the lines better because what your opposition is doing. You want inverted wingers that can cut inside and play diagonals and shoot. Or you want, you know, players that can go down the side of the block. So each decision you're making with, for example, substitutions, you're definitely computing a lot of stuff. I would say it's interesting. You say in-game coaching, I would say you're managing more, but not coaching more. So because of the speed of the game, I would say by the time you get to the game, you're managing the game more, making strategical decisions. Your coaching's been done. So the players know the plan, the players know the structure, they know the opposition, how they want to, and all that stuff. So the players have the freedom within the framework, as I call it, to make those decisions. But you're definitely managing that a lot more. You're managing your opposition. You're watching your opposition. It might be physically you're making changes. So you can. I know, for example, that some of my players had a 3-minute window before they die. I know some of them have a 6-minute window before they die. I know my high intensity players that after they've done 1 or 2 big sprints, they've got to get them off. I know some players could do 22 minutes and roll and manage the game. So you've got loads of those different sort of computer decisions. You know, some players play well together. So twos, threes, fours. You could tactically, I'm going on here, but you could tactically change 4 and 4 for a different type. So I could get a defensive 4, I can get attacking 4, I can get a set piece 4. But ultimately, before that, I have like everything like that was planned right. I know my good 4s, I know my ball playing 4, I know my defensive 4. So if I'm winning a game, I'd put probably more defensive 4 on. So I'd know all that through my player learning, through what I'd want, through my selection processes. But I would have, like, I called it what if plans. So I would have what if plans. So for example, what would be my first changes if we're 0-0? What would I do at 1-0 at 25 minutes? What would I do if I'm 2-0 down? What would I do if I'm winning at 3-0? And how do you fit your personnel into that? So yeah, now that doesn't mean I wouldn't go by my guts, but ultimately I would have a process that sits behind my guts. And I'd still have to make in-gut decisions, and I'd still have to go by the science and the GPS and everything we talk about. But it's just fitting all the pieces together to help you manage the game.
We'll just take a quick break here. Thank you so much for watching the content at Modern Soccer Coach. If you would like to support what we're doing and help us provide more free coaching education with the webinars and the podcast and everything else, please take a look at this offer that we have from the webinars over the summer. Coaches can now download every single webinar tactical presentation that we did from the lockdown period over the summer. Just over $1 per webinar. You can personally download all 25 webinars that will be yours to keep. Each webinar is over 1 hour long and features a detailed presentation followed by live Q&A with the coaches in attendance. We cover topics such as youth and elite player development, sports science, tactical analysis, match preparation, goalkeeper pressing, and other key specific areas. We had coaches such as Jesse Marsh, Nolan Sheldon, Ivan Baregi, Adine Osman-Basic, Oliver Gage, Jonas Munkfall, Kat Smith, John Wall, and many more. modernsoccercoach.com/shop. You can go there, get yours now, support Modern Soccer Coach, help us provide free content with our webinars and podcasts throughout the year. Thank you.
The one complaint I have on the boot room article was that it made your in-game management seem very, very cohesive and smooth. And I'm thinking, I can't get my head around that because like I've managed in college in America, you've got probably about 8 to 9 subs because it's so, and I really struggled to manage because here's what I want to ask you, because at a decent level, it gets to the stage where he or she is not performing. It's not their day. So you have someone saying, all right, Stevie's coming on, Johnny's coming on or off and on. Do you ever have to step in and be like, not today, Johnny, sit back down?
Yeah, that's performance, right? That's performance. So 100%. So like I would have like my different 4s, but then I'd have other players that fit into those different 4s. And if for whatever reason a player's not on it, 100%, I'd step in and go, sorry, I want X in today, and I think they're doing better. Well, I wouldn't have that conversation at that point on the bench because we haven't got the time. But players aren't stupid, right? Players know that if you're not having them on that day, or you think that someone else is doing better, or it might even be that someone's just having a bigger impact on the strategy that you want. You just get used to doing that on the bench. So like I would generally look at the game tactically, and I would say to my assistant, right, boom, 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 I want these next 4. I want my second 4. I want pivot for pivot. They would make the substitution. So we'd have a strategy on the bench to manage all this computing as well. So it wouldn't be just me. I'd have my assistant, managing the substitutions and, but the players also self-manage that. So if a player's running off, like I've just done 3 doggies from front to back and I'm the back man, and I know that if I stay on, I'm going to cause us a problem, the next back man will jump up and change. But then I could change him within 20 seconds to say, okay, I want this Batman on because I've got 3, but I want him on because I want another 4 with you in it later. So you've even got the forward planning for who you want. So I love it because you got so much like you make so many bad decisions but also you're making so many decisions, you're making some good ones. So actually, in a way, I love it because you're having such an impact. You know, like as much as you make decisions right, you got a chance of making it right, you got a chance of making it wrong. So I think the game of futsal for coach development is actually brilliant. Is actually really brilliant, because we talk about player development all the time, but what about coach development, or what about how it helps you refine decision making in substitutions, for example? You know, if you take the course of 10 years of working in futsal, you've made tens of thousands of substitution. Have you made the same in football? And have you really thought about why you're making them? So yeah,
very interesting. The accountability with the, you know, if you don't track a run, it could be curtains at the other end. You could cost your team a goal, you said there, if you're not really at the best physically. Sometimes like the accountability in 11v11 is quite high as well, set pieces, where footballers almost struggle globally, is that taking responsibility or recognizing that accountability. I mean, is that something that you follow up? How do you drive accountability on a daily basis in those moments?
Yeah, I think you've probably hit the nail on the head of what's brilliant about the game for football development. The feedback you get instantly from futsal around your decisions is straight away, right? It's just brilliant, because if you press badly as a number 9 in football, you've got another 10 other people, another 40 meters. You're not always punished for it, right? And you can go, well, yeah, and you don't really go back to it because there's bigger pictures to carry on. But you know, if you press badly in futsal and you get popped around, it could be a goal because they've become 4v3 or you've not got back quick enough. So that's where you get feedback, because you're getting feedback on your press straight away that it wasn't right for whatever reason, or you got beat. So to give that example, so I actually think like the instant feedback you get from futsal, small-sided, I think if it's managed and developed properly, is superb for player development. And it's interesting you said that. One of the areas that we have futsal players, and we started to take professional football players out of the game. And one area they were good technically, they could take things on, but the one area they struggled with was the transition, the speed of transition. And I think futsal is at times the speed of the transition, the speed of thought that a futsal player has is phenomenal. You know, and at the top level, the speed is 6 or 7 times quicker than a football game. So if you get a shot off, the keeper saves it, and we call that, you know, that's not what you want to happen, and they zip it down past you, you got to be back quickly, and you got to have the principles of the game lined in. So I think it's about, you know, we talk about principles all the time in futsal, principles and concepts, so that players can make decisions. And principle 1 is you've got to get, if you lose the ball, you've got to get behind the line of the ball. Everybody. That's principle 1, you know, whether you're pressing, whether you're mid block, whether you're low block, that's the first principle, because otherwise you haven't got 3 lines of defense. So we talk about always having 3 lines of defense in that principle. Then we talk about, you know, like you say, the speed of transition, the lines of transition. So I'm totally with you on that, and that's what I'm saying about, like, at the start of the conversation, think about what players are doing off the ball, either in possession or out of possession, and that really gives you the wow factor from the game if you were looking at it for player development. And also, if you think about what they're doing off the ball as a futsal coach, I think that's where you see the good players actually. But we hone in on the bit they're on the ball all the time so much, we're missing a lot of that. We can miss a lot of that. And yeah, it's a great point, really. Did I answer that question? I can't remember.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I'm loving this here. Whenever going to that transition, because I feel that attacking transition, I always felt and still feel like it's the hardest moment to coach, because of, you mentioned that, decision, perception, execution. When the players are in that moment and you say that the 11v11 struggle, which one is it? Is it the decision, or is it the perception, or which element do you feel?
I think, well, first is the switching on to the change of action. So like the emotional response and time you can have to go, oh, I've lost possession, now I've got to get back. You don't have that time in futsal. It's like you've lost possession, forget it, go. The next action is the most important. The next action is always the most important. And I think that's the bit around like the psychological, mental constraint of the game, because it's quick, because it changes so quick, because there's changes of possession so quick. You don't have time to moan at the referee. You don't have time to think about what you've just done. You need to make the right decision now, whether you've lost possession, gained possession. And then around that, scaffold and build like the perception stuff around, quickly is I used to say, let's take positive, I call it positive transition defense to attack. Overload is better than speed for me. So for example, if you quickly look up and you've got 3 players against 2, keep the overload for as long as possible, keep the ball central. There's a concept, there's a principle that you need to go to. Don't just lift your head and run down the side of the lane, because you'll just get one player could protect that against the line. So, once you've got them to understand the speed, then you need to get them to understand the principles, and then you need to understand the concepts. And then they're in a place where they can make some real good decisions around the game and what's happening. And we always forget, when we're coaching, that it's not just about us, because you've got an opposition. So the scenario is always built around you plus the opposition. And I think that's the key to it. In really, like, you take the transition moment around that.
With this here, moving along nicely in the decision making of the player, and going back to that aspect of it, and again, another aspect of the video that was quite big on was discussion groups with the players, the Subbuteo table and the players.
Okay,
yeah, I love that there. What fascinates me or interests me is that with players who don't grow up with in the UK, like if I was placed in that scenario to have a discussion group, and I have 25 odd years of 11v11 coaching behind me, I would not know where to start. Do you give them a framework of how or what to discuss, or is that fairly open on situations? Or I suppose, how do you facilitate that there?
For me, your framework comes from your game model. So your framework always links back to your model and how you want to play and what principles you have that sit behind the game model. And that, so I call it, sub-principles, principles, moments of the game, where you are on the pitch, what phase you are in that game. And then players, then you teach the players the options, but what are the best options depending on what the opposition do, right? So, and usually for me, that always comes back down to pressure on the ball. What does pressure look like on the ball, with the ball and without the ball? What are the best decisions you can make collectively when your teammate is being pressed from inside and outside, and how do you all move together? And so you start to scaffold those things with the players. And it's interesting on that was a senior group of players, right? And it would be very stupid of me to work with any senior group of players and not get their opinions of what they're feeling and what they're seeing. But it's not like, it's not throwing the French book at them and saying, learn French. Mm-hmm. It's like, give them the French book and say, on page 56, I think this is a good idea. What do you think out of page 56 we can adapt for us? And what do you think we can take? So I think there's a subtle difference between letting them have all the discussion and it doesn't matter what. And I'm very much around setting the learning environment up off the court as well as on the court, but you've got to have the same frameworks that you have on it. So there's no point in going, right, do what you want. It's not about, like, for me in high performance, doing what you want. It's about, we know you need to make the decisions as players. We have some ideas, concepts that we've built with you. What now would we think is the best scenario to go and play them? What do you think is going to come out? And how do we now practice them at high performance level? And how can we get the most out of it? And how do you all know that you're all on the same page, right? Because that's what building a team's about. It's not just about me being good as an individual. If I go past the player on the outside, it's going second post or shot. Who's on the second post? So to give you an example of that, we would talk about, like, finishing futsal is second post, top of D, second post, top of D. So if I've made an attack and I'm going to put the ball anywhere, it's going to be second post or top of D. So you better make sure you're there, and it's just building those, and then building those 2v2 concepts. So what you probably saw with the players is, like, one of them would be going, well, I did this, so I need you to come and do this more, or I need you to come and do that more. And it's just framing that conversation. But there is a health warning with it, right? Because it can go too far and it can be too much talk, and it can be, so you have to be able to, I don't know, open the accordion and close it when you want as a coach. And I think at times, I can't remember in that video, at times you need to be able to say, no, look, yeah, the discussion is great, but your job is now to do it. My job is to put that discussion together and build the framework and build the strategy and build the plan. But you're judged on what you do, sadly, because you're a player, right? But let's not make any mistakes here. The more that you can, I like to get the players to help you build the strategy and help you build it for two reasons. One, they're part of it. They've got to play it. 2, they've got some good knowledge, and to the thirdly, you get better buy-in, I think, from the players. So yeah, it's a skill, but it's a skill. And the tactics board, and sorry, the table is because we're talking about body position, we're talking about perception, we're talking about if my body position's this way, what do you need to support me? Because I'm communicating with you with my body. I don't need to tell you. I'm doing it with my body. So that the Subutio and the tactics board is there for that reference about the detail that sits behind it.
You said it's a skill there, and I completely agree. I almost feel that, not in communicator coach education, but just in general, maybe in social media and in messaging, like a coach-led environment is bad and a player-led environment is good. But in reality, there is a time that the players will have to, we're all agreeing that we're going in this direction. Would you agree with that?
I think if I understand your question, it's like there still needs to be someone that drives the bus.
Well, there needs to be someone making the call at some element.
Yeah. 100%. And do you know what? I think like that's the coach, right? Because at times the players need you to make that. So I would just say, when they go to war, sometimes, and it depends on the player, right? So, and this is where I think the player comes into the mix in the melting pot effect. It'll always depend on the player, because some players like to be told, some players don't like to be told. But I don't think we can, and I think it differs on the different age groups, So I think I would coach differently with the kids than I would coach with the youth, than I coach with the seniors. And I think this is where we definitely have skilled coaches with wide foundation phases and skilled coaches with senior. And that's not to say everything with senior is didactic and told, because it doesn't need to be, and it isn't. And that's not to say with the kids it's always about just being free. For me, it's like anything in life, it's balance, right? it's being able to balance in the situation and in the moment about when you want to get the most out of your players or when they need you the most, And sometimes needing it is like, I don't know, it's like being a parent. Sometimes you need to tell your kids because they're going to put their finger in the electric shock, and we know that because we have experiences. So don't let them do that, because and actually sometimes you need to let them fall over and fall off the bike a little bit. And I think for me, it's exactly the same in teaching and coaching and in high performance. The difference at high performance is, you've got the winning bit a lot more, I think, and I think that's right, because we're growing kids to learn the game and enjoy the game. And I had that 3 core things I think we talked about, which is probably built in that way.
Yeah, your my game, our game, your game methodology. I thought this was brilliant. I was talking to our staff about this today. Like what I really like about it actually is that you've provided clarity in the initial, like, my game. Again, like, I feel a lot of coaches today are trying to involve the player in so many decisions that the player would actually like a little bit more clarification. But what I was interested from your perspective was why, or what are some ways that you feel that you have to be clear on that initial structure? Why is that got to be coach led, I suppose, in the build?
Yep, no, that's a great question. I think I picked that up on my world coaching rounds, and I think like one advice that I got from an experienced coach was, whenever you play another coach, speak to them about what they tried to do to beat you, what you tried to do to me. And I've done that for the last 20 years. Like, I will try, not always get that, but I always say, how did you try and beat me, right? And I can remember having this, and one of them said to me, you've got some great things. You just need to grow the clarity, which was great. So this was donkeys years ago. Because, as we grow as coaches, you're right. We sometimes want to give too much freedom and I thought, I sat down and I thought, right, this is what I want it to be. In, like you say, in the build phase or the first phase or the back phase, you give options, but ultimately I'm giving those options because I think there are good and better options. And in a way, I don't want it to be so free that no one knows what I'm doing as a player, because we're not going to get out of the press. We're not going to get out of the situation. So we have to be very collective in what we do to get out of that. Yes, that doesn't mean if you see a 1v1, you can't make the decision as a player. But ultimately, my strategy is what's going to be implemented on you as players here and how I want you to play out of this pressure. Because I think that gives, in that third, in futsal, in football, that also gives clarity is definitely that, but also comfort, right? Because no one wants to make a bad decision on the edge of their own area. So let's try and make it so that I can support you by giving you more, right? I support you by telling you more. And then as we move through the thirds, we need the innovation, the creativity at the final third. That we don't want teams to know what we're doing structurally so much. We want you to be free. We want you to, and in the middle bit, it's a bit of both of us. It's a bit of how we're going to build and how we're going to structure patterns and how we're going to get into our, finalization or finishing phase. So it is really built around, the technical, what requirements we need, the tactical, the psychological demands of being in those areas on the pitch, and then the social bit. How do we connect the players? So yeah, I would be, we set up a team to play Italy who are a lot stronger than us in futsal. And I set up a team about we're going to use the keeper and we're going to draw Italy in. And after 2 touches out of his feet, we're going to go diagonal and we're going to try and catch them. That's our game. And, quite didactic, quite wanting this. And then other teams, we've done it where we've played more out. So we didn't think their press is as good. So we would have a pattern or, like you say, a rotation that would be bit more robotic maybe. But then a bit more freedom comes as we go through the court. Yeah.
Brilliant. It's really, really interesting, that story there about asking the coach about your own team there. Fantastic. Whenever you mentioned at the start about going to Thailand as a player and having that eye-opening experience, have you found or have you experienced anything as a coach where you've gone to a different environment and thought in a futsal context and been like, this is what it should look like, or this is, I'm picturing Brazil here, and I'm guessing that you've been over there. What are some differences in culture? What are some things that you wanted to take from other places and bring to the England team?
Yeah, I suppose one, great question. I think every culture is slightly different, and I think the success of the Spanish was probably when they stopped trying to be like Brazil. Sounds stupid, but they take the good elements from Brazil and try and build themselves. But I think every culture with futsal, like football, is slightly different. People play, there's systems in futsal, there's a way of defending, there's a way of attacking, exactly like 11v11. But it's been developed over 70 years. So I'm a newbie really to some of the old, I've been doing it, 20 odd years, but I'm a newbie compared to some people that have just grown up with it as a game. But one thing that strikes me is the intensity. There is a lot more higher intensity of which these actions are happening that can only come from, a pathway of high intensity decision making, understanding the skills, understanding the concepts. So, like I said, on it can look really free, and it is free, but there's a framework to it. There's a structure to it. But within that structure, there is the freedom to be yourself and the freedom to take on players and the freedom to go past players. But ultimately, they're making that decision on the space and the gaps. So I'd say one thing that I think the other cultures do really well is coaching the space and coaching the gaps and letting the players exploit those in certain ways. Like the big picture system 4-4-2 is that probably only there at the start of a game. After that, it's about players' spaces and gaps. And I think that's definitely where I see where futsal helps develop really talented footballers, where they can then transition into the 11v11 game. And it's like, oh, I've done this before somewhere, and it looks a bit like this, but actually I can really just jump across. So when they get into 2v2 situations or 3v3 situations, I think there's huge synergies that we rush. And I'm not sure about America, but in England, we rush coaches and players from foundation phase right to 11v11. And even though we've got the formats that go through it, the coaches are really thinking about the system. When actually, I always think like in a car, when a car breaks down, you don't just get rid of the engine and change the whole system. So, when a 4-4-2 is not working, is it because it's the wrong system? Or is it because some of the parts aren't working together? Is it because the 2v2s or the 3v3s aren't working together? And I think that's where educated futsal coaches that I've seen are really masters. They're absolutely masters at that detail. They're absolutely masters at working out those problems.
Yeah, something that I've seen over here, and I don't think we do a good job here of just coaching problem solving in general in our society over here. But we always talk about creating 2v1s in wide areas, and it's the most underused. I rarely see a 2v1 actually used, and it must be the most easiest overload in the history of the game is isolated fullback, attacking fullback, wide attacker. That comes from, not directly, but that can come from just rushing through processes from a development standpoint.
Yeah, yes, it's a great point, because in a 2v1 or a 3v2 or an overload in futsal is like gold dust, right? Like gold dust. For us, you don't take that, you've missed an opportunity to score. Generally, we like the 2v2s matched up because we like to take advantage. So we always, like 1v1, if you can't take advantage, boom, you've got to go 2v2. And as the numbers get bigger, 4v4, 3v3, 2v2, as the numbers get bigger, it's harder to take advantage of a matched up. If the numbers are smaller, so I'd say to you, think about 2v2s. How do you take advantage as a pair against another pair rather than the overload? So I think it's easier to create overloads, and probably, it's a great point actually, because I think actually a solution to a football problem means getting another number, right? So how do we get another number involved? So how do we make this 4v5 or 5v4, or how do we make this 6v5 to get that overload, which is great. A solution sometimes in futsal that's so hard to get. How do you take advantage matched up? Positional superiority, individual superiority, court superiority. So yeah, and I think that's probably another tool that I've seen, learn a lot in my time in futsal, that how you can take advantage 2v2. How do you flatten out? How do you temporize the game, change the tempo of the game to get defenders flat, to get the space in behind? So we have a system called 4-0, which is like playing out from the back as a 4. And ultimately, it's about moving the ball to draw defenders to you to create more space in behind. And then how do you take advantage of that situation? You hear that a lot in futsal. How do you take advantage matched up? How do you take advantage matched up? So, yeah, if you get 2v1, take it.
Last couple for you here. This is flown. Your role at Loughborough in 2012 for a few years, and obviously coming from Northern Ireland myself, there's quite a few coaches that have come out of Loughborough that are working in full-time football. Was there what was there in that environment 10 plus years ago that you were looking as a director there to create for the coaches of tomorrow?
Yeah, so wow, Loughborough's an amazing place, right? I think Loughborough's just phenomenal for certain reasons. One is you're around lots of other high performance sports, so you can cherry pick, nick, steal, against some things that you're around for sports, and rather than like sports people coming into you and teaching you what they do in, I don't know, hockey, or teaching what they do in cricket, or teaching you as a guest what they do in cycling. If you immerse yourself with other different sports, you tend to, or I tended to, go out and take things I wanted from those sports, and you work with them, you develop them, you nurture them, and that's the culture. So Loughborough's got that culture of, and I think, like you say, I think it's brilliant. I think at one point there was like 95% of sports analysts in the Premier League were from Loughborough. And because it's got the education, because it's got the research, because it's got the practical element to it, you find it's just this microcosm of, if that's the right term, this area of, coaches coming out of the game because they've been involved in that culture at Loughborough that is about, trying things, failing, innovation, nicking from each other, and I think lots of people have come through it. But when I was there, as a few years ago now, before I took on a national role, you always sounds again back in my Loughborough days. They said always don't support the young coach, but don't forget to learn from them, because a young coach are connected with what the modern game looks like. So if you want to keep yourself modern, when the young coaches come through, you've got to connect with them, and it doesn't matter what sport. And sometimes I think we think the younger coaches coming through, because they're young, they don't have good ideas. Well, in fact, they're the innovators. They're the ones that are probably bringing the new ideas to the table, and like technology or all these moving parts that we now have. So I think one thing I learned, and I got my coaches to understand, is you need to be practically good first, as in a coach. You need to understand learning. You need to understand, and this is where I like performance systems. So how do performance services connect? And Loughborough's brilliant for that for me. Managing an MDT team, managing your staff team. How do these evolve? And then how do you get the best out of players and staff? And one mantra they have is it's a great mantra, is always do the right thing when no one is looking, right? And that's their sort of strapline, where history begins, and always do the right thing when no one is looking, which basically means it's easy to do the right thing as an athlete, as a coach, when their eyes are on you. actually you win medals, you become better when it's not on you and you're there on your own and you're struggling to think, to develop. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Absolutely.
yeah.
No, it's I again fascinated by it. I just saw a couple of weeks ago with Eric Ramsey going to
Eric,
United, and
he played futsal under me. Eric did.
oh, did he?
Yeah.
And Kieran McKenna as well. Did you work with Kieran?
Kieran, well, yeah, one of the coaches when I was there at the football program. Yeah, so there's been some, which is great to see. It's great to see them going into the game, and you only have to look at people before me: Tom Curtis, Tony Strudwick, a guy called James Ellis in scouting, and it's just this hub of learning, really, and not afraid to. I would say the two things that people don't understand about Loughborough is one is sport, one is entrepreneurs. So in Loughborough, there's lots of entrepreneurs that come out as a business school, and it makes a lot of its investment through, and they sort of link naturally, right, in terms of innovation, and you're pushed to innovate, you're pushed to try things new. And I think if you take the football program, for example, like it's a high performance system. We're getting players out the game. We are trying to get players back in the game. We're trying to win futsal. We're trying to win the women's game. We're trying to do all that, but you don't get sacked if you lose. So actually, you're allowed to do. I think that means that you're allowed to do more and experiment more as a coach or a leader to find yourself, to find how you want to work, and then how you want to develop it in your processes. So, yeah, I'm trying to sell Loughborough, aren't I? But I think it's just like I'm not trying to sell it. But I think that was my time there. And I tried to get my, Eric Ramsey and those coaches to really think about it in that way, and don't forget to innovate, because that's what keeps you current.
No, it's also inspiring for I think there is a new, not I don't know if it's new anymore, but the players that don't have the player, coaches that don't have the player experience, and that know then they see coaches at the highest level, that they know that if they apply themselves, and they also got to be good. But you can, I think analysis has grown, science has grown, but then just seeing coaches on the grass, I think that's something that young coaches need to see as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think 100% there's some, great examples. Eric or Kieran played a little bit, but, let's take, they've played a little bit, but not like you say, Premier League players coming down into the game. And I think it helps to have a playing experience. Is it the be all and end all? No. You can still make it in the game in a volunteer way. I think one thing I've definitely seen that maybe if I could, tell youngsters today is, and it doesn't matter what coach you've seen, I believe every coach has done the hard yards, has worked hard behind the scenes, has volunteered, for days on end, and you see these top coaches. But, and I think that's another thing, like Loughborough, every single sport athlete, you could be getting back from a game in Stirling that we had at 5 a.m, and people are out running. You've got Adam Peaty going to the swimming pool at 5 a.m. You've got the rowers going out, and it's like, Jesus, it's dark, it's 5, and there's all these people around. What's going on? And it's like a culture of like drive. If you want to get out of Loughborough successful, the one thing you learn is like, if you don't work hard, you don't commit, you don't learn, you don't volunteer in every aspect in terms of supporting the game or whatever you want to be, someone next to you's doing it, so they've got more chance. It's not necessarily they'll make it, but they've got more chance of being better.
We can start a new podcast here. So we're moving to my last question, which is like advice for coaches, but I kind of want to tie that in, because a conversation I was having a couple of weeks ago with a colleague was, I feel that we've made coach education very outcome driven at the minute, where you're trying to get your A license or your B license, and you go, and maybe I'm thinking of it now because we're in a remote learning time. So, yeah. But those coaches aren't really getting, you're not really graded on the impact of your environment. You're graded on your assessments and your paperwork. Yeah. But are you really learning, to make those interactions count with your players,
Yeah. Okay, yeah, makes sense. I think that over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, with what I saw with the advanced, I'll give the FA because I know that the Advanced Youth Awards and that development I think was brilliant, because it more honed in on like how you deal with your players. Yeah, so I always say this, like you can have my sessions. I'm not bothered, because at the end of the day, my session, what it looks like with my players is different what it's going to look like with your players and X players and Y players. So, like I think that you can't copy culture. You can have frameworks that work for it, but you can't copy it. You know, how I worked with Loughborough, we work with it. I might have things that I use that I go back to and I've learned over my time how I want to operate. But I think top coaches, you can't copy culture. You can't, the players are different. So everything, there's so many moving parts as a coach. You need to understand the moving parts and how you want to be in those moving parts. And I think that's got better over time. I think, but the challenge you have, right, is for me the system, because the system drives jobs and drives requirements and drives an A license to get X and drives a B license to get Y, and and generally, like, if you're more a senior coach, you might get a better job that's paid more, which I think is wrong. I think the specialist in youth development, the specialist in foundation phase. And I would love to see a top club kick the curb a little bit and go, do you know what? Foundation phase is where we're going to really grow our players. I'm going to put some real good salaries in there. And we're going to put some real good development. I'm not a foundation phase coach, because I've grown up with senior players at Loughborough, at national teams. I work with senior players, 16s and above, 15, 16s and above, I would say. I would not, it scares the hell out of me working with kids, right? And that's not because, of the kids. The kids are great. It scares the hell out of me because I can't get the most out of them, like a guy called Pete Sturgis can, who's, so he's an absolute guru in that area. So I believe that we need to look at it as more modularization for a coach. So I generally believe that coaching will move down the road of like a spiral learning curriculum. Like, we talk about 2v2s and 3v3s. At 2v2 for foundation phase looks very different at 2v2 trying to win a World Cup in football. But actually, we need to understand that depending on where we're working and how we structure it and how we build it. So I think the modern coaching system will become more modularized, where, you go into a sweet shop as a coach and you pick what you think you're missing, rather than you tell me what I'm missing and then give me a certificate around it. But I do also believe there has to be a level of competence. And I haven't got the answers to this, by the way, but I'm just saying, like, so the certificates give you a level of competence. Probably start the journey rather than end it. So any budding coach, when you get your A license, yes, you get over the line, but you probably don't know how to use the A license yet. So if you want to be successful, it's got to be how you use it. Like driving, right? Like you get your driving certificate, you go home to your mum and dad and go, wow, I've passed. And the first thing they do is like, oh my God, you're going to go out on your own. Like, that's what they do, don't you? You're not having a car because I don't want you to get on the motorway. And I think coaching is a bit like that in that sense. But I think the system drives that. And I think that's the failing maybe in the system, but I don't know a better way of doing it. If, in all of my experiences, how do you differentiate within a system where everybody's trying to do it? But I would like to see more specialisms get the rewards for how good they are at their specialism.
Brilliant. Last one, coaches that are listening to this, and maybe in the US, maybe in the UK, maybe somewhere around the world, that are looking to say, I'd love to go into futsal. I'd love to learn more about it. I'd love to get stuck into it. What advice would you have for them?
Get into it. Just like, for me, there's three tiers of futsal, and I think, to be clear, the three tiers of this, it's recreational, like what I say, people can play futsal just for fun or coach it just for fun. There's what I call more structured community futsal or club futsal or grassroots, where you want to know a bit more. And again, this can be for football development, futsal development, and then there's like elite futsal, and then there's performance futsal. And I think, why do you want to get into futsal? Why do you want to do it? What's the reasons for it? If you want to do it for football development, then don't just do it for recreational. Go and think about it with a club. Go and see a local club that's doing it more and a local coach that's doing it more. Sometimes if you jump to high performance futsal, you can be really turned off because you're like, oh my God, what is going on here? And actually, so don't be afraid to go down to your local futsal club and just have the conversations, or have a conversation with a person to go, what is going on here? And, support that way, and, treat it like in a way that you're going to see a different sport. But knowing that quite a bit, because it's similar to the game if you're coming in from a football environment. But definitely, does it make you a better player? I think if I'd have played it more as a younger, I think I'd be a better player, definitely. And I think we see that from, like we've talked about today, most of the coaches. I think that the one thing that futsal does a lot in is 2v2s, 3v3s, and all the sort of components around that. And everyone thinks it's 5v5, so we're always coaching 5v5. That's like 11v11 being 11v11, always coaching it. You go 7v7, 9v9. Same in futsal, we go 3v3 a lot and 2v2 a lot. So if you're looking for those sort of nuggets and some different ideas around that within football, you can do that. And I think it will hook you, right? I think it will hook you because of the things that we've been speaking around today. And then you've got more of a, do you go futsal? Do you go football? Do you like futsal? Choices in life, I think, are good, right? For players, for coaches, for everyone, But understanding the choice in more detail is quite good. And obviously I've been in the game a long time. It's exciting. It's exciting to be part of. So yeah, but so is football, right? It's exciting as well.
Absolutely. Michael, outstanding. This is absolutely flown. One of my favorite interviews. It's just been. I feel like I've even the research of it. I really enjoyed. It's something that I'm going to take more of an interest in. And it's got so much. I think the tactical understanding of it is absolutely fascinating, and the player ownership side of it for me personally. So thank you so much for coming on. Fantastic.
No, thank you for having me. Hopefully it's helped, and good luck with everything else.